Greetings, I in Gresham's at arm, and welcome back to Gresham Reads Monster Blood Tattoo, Book 1, Foundling, by D.M. Cornish. So in the last chapter, Rossamünd had a bit of travel time with Europe and Licurius, I believe his name is. I'm still 100% certain, not 100% certain on how that name is pronounced, but I believe it is Licurius. Or it might be Licurius, not sure. But along their travels, they had managed to make their way into a deep, I suppose you could call it a valley. Yes. It was a valley, I remember correctly now. But at the precipice of the valley, where a bridge would have crossed over, they had encountered a creature known as the Misbegotten Shrew. It was apparently I believe, if I recall correctly, the larger ones were known as knickers. But it is a being known as the Init, I believe. Let us see. An Etin, that's what it was. Ettin. An Etin, known as the Misbegotten Shrew, who was apparently acting as a highwayman and of a sort, trying to charge a toll in order to cross the bridge. Of course, this poor creature had the unfortunate luck of encountering a Fulgar Lazar, and one who was none too kind towards it, which is unfortunate. It did not seem like a cruel individual, considering that its barrel that it used to collect the toll was full of primarily junk and garbage. Nothing too serious, meaning it would have accepted some food items as the toll. But such things are to be in a world where monsters are treated as little more than beings that must be eradicated. This creature proves that some are not as evil as they are made out to be. But we also have the fact that Rossamünd had originally promised to stay in the... what was it called? Landalet, which I assume is some form of carriage. I've honestly not heard the term Landalet before, so it is an interesting one. But either way, I am spending too much time monologuing. The recap is fairly straightforward, considering not too much happened. But either way, Rossamünd had leapt from the Landalet in order to try and convince Europe to stop. But unfortunately, it was too late for the Misbegotten Shrew, and it was unfortunately killed. And we shall see the results of Rossamünd's actions at a later date in this chapter, I believe. Possibly within the next few pages, but either way, let us begin, I suppose. So, we begin, of course, with the vocabulary, or definition. Let's see. Sidorner. Noun. Official name for a monster lover, often used as an insult. To be heard even trying to understand monsters from a sympathetic point of view can bring the charge upon one. Different communities and realms deal with Sojourners in their own severity, but it is not uncommon for those found guilty to be exposed on a Catherine wheel or even hanged on gallows. So to even show sympathy or trying to understand them would result in a death sentence. That is fairly brutal. But we shall move on. Chapter 8. Vigilance and Vigilance. To come back to awareness after you have been unconscious, especially if you have been unconscious for a long time, is an exceedingly odd experience. The first sensations Rossamünd became aware of were his hearing and a great ache in his brain. Amid the sharp throbbing was a rushing whoosh that spun about in his head, rising till he almost understood its purpose, then descending back to nothing. Rising again, descending again. After who knows how long, he came to realize it was the sighing of wind in treetops, the voice of birds calling thin, lonely music, and the tap, tap, tap of a small scratching very close by. Smells returned, pine needles, wood smoke, and some worse stink. The sense of touch followed these other clarities as he felt his own weight pressing on something hard, yet strangely yielding. He became aware that he had a hand, and that his hand was holding something that felt rough, yet also soft. His scarf. He tried to move his hand and found that he could not. He was numb at every joint, frozen in every muscle. He could not even open his eyes. It was then that memory returned. Rossamünd forgot all the sensations he had just rediscovered, and was filled instead with the recollection of all that had just passed. The destruction of the poor misbegotten shrew. He should not have cared. He should have rejoiced. One more triumph of everyday folk over the ancient oppression of the monsters. Yet, somehow, the Foundling could not see much to cheer in it. Some poor ignorant slain just for being in the way. Instead, a great sorrow set in his heart. What would Master Frenzitar think of this? Rossamünd had met his first knicker, and come out of the experience a monster lover. Unable to move or see, he lay filled with grief for some brutish giant he did not know, and should not like. A new sound broke in, right by his head. Hold, that something must be done. It was the wheezing of the terrible leer Licurius. He was right by Rossamünd, far too close for the Foundling's ease. The boy's stomach churned in pure fright. I have done enough, don't you think? It was just a little spark to quiet him, but look now. This was Europe's voice. Europe, the mighty Fulgar. Europe, the slayer of innocence. Europe, the electrocutor of children. How powerfully uncertain he was of her now. So this is what she meant by a glorious life of violence. What good is he? Just some squirming snot nobody wants. You spied how he cried for that beggar. Shed real tears like a toddling lass. Some tottering great waste of a knicker. You did a rightly with him, I say. We've got naught spare for a rotten little Sojourner like himself, his same self there. Rossamünd's soul froze. A Sojourner, a monster lover. That was one of the worst things to be called. Worse yet, they were quite clearly talking about him. What were they going to do to him? Europe sighed, long, almost sad sigh. Stay in the carriage, and everything was good. That was all it needed. What is it with males and listening? Wonder how this would read in the panegyric of my life, that I shock bantling brats. All the more reason to repair the wreckage. You should slit his belly and spill his umbles right here and leave done with it. The Lear's voice rasped right by Rossamünd's ear. Or take his corpse and blame it on that Etin. A clear reputation is as good as a clear conscience, like you always say. Hush it, boxface. You push too much. This circumstance does not warrant such brutal work. My word, Lear, you're starting to scare me with your talk of slitting and spilling. It has gone from worse to worse these past months. Is it possible your black old heart gets blacker still? The Lear hissed long and coolly. The Landelot shook for a moment, as if there was a struggle. Was Licurius daring to tangle with the Fulgar? Europe gave a yelp. Enough now! Rossamünd lay aware, terrified yet blind and paralyzed. With the shaking of the carriage, this terror rose unwanted from his gut to his throat, and though he tried to suppress it, it came out as a bubbling, whimpering cough. Everything seemed to go even more still. Then, Europe sounded relieved. It appears he has returned to us. Good. Don't be blubbering to me then, Sparky, Licurius said, concluding their previous business with faintly wrathful tones. When this son places well-found blame on your pretty plate. Enough! The Lazar's voice wavered briefly. Cease your insolence and boil the water. You know I am sorely in need. With this little outburst, Rossamünd found some capacity of movement return. He wrenched his eyes open in an instant, and as his neck still proved stubbornly immobile, rolled them around wildly to know his fate. He was lying under a blanket on one of the seats of the landau, staring up at the clear sky pricked with early evening's first stars, through high scruffy bows, they were still in the forest. It was bitterly, breath-steamingly cold. He began to shiver. Europe was in her usual place on the opposite couch. Her hair was down, and that big book she scribbled in was upon her lap. By her sat the lantern, already lit. She was looking at him with an expression he could not fathom, neither hostile nor tender. He blinked over and over at her, limbs twitching as he tried to get some use out of them. Good evening, little man, the Lazar said slowly, her arms folded, her right hand up and covering her mouth and chin. Don't wriggle so. You'll be able to move soon enough, she chided, as Rossamünd's wiggling turned to writhing. He did not heed her, but struggled and strained to get his body to respond. Now that they knew he was alive, that he was awake, he did not want to remain vulnerable one moment longer. Europe leaned over and placed a hand upon his shoulder. At this, he yowled mightily. Europe herself shied, genuinely startled. Licurius came over to see about the commotion. What a noisy little toad, he growled, gripping the Foundling hard about his throat. Hush it, basket, or you'll die here and now. All sound was pressed from Rossamünd as the Lear clenched tighter and tighter, the boy's cry changing to a panicked gurgle. Let go of him, Licurius, this instant! Europe glared at her factotum. The leer ignored her completely. Come on, little girl. Squeal like you did when I had you by the ankles. His arms jerked uselessly. Rossamünd tried desperately to squash the man's hand between his chin and throat. How dare you leer? You serve my ends, not I yours. The Fulgar stood, her hair beginning to bristle with static. The book sliding from her lap to the floor of the lindolet with a thump. Let go your hold and step back. We have not the time for this, and I have not the patience. For a moment longer, Licurius seemed set on ignoring his mistress, then suddenly loosened his grip and turned to peer over his left shoulder. He stepped away, then hesitated, hissing, "That's not right." He plainly sniffed at the air, the sound of it coming clearly from the many holes in the stenocon. Rossamünd squirmed away as best he could to the other side of the carriage, tears coming from his eyes and nose. "You were thin, laggard," Europe hissed in turn. "What is it now?" The leer did not answer, but stood for many strained minutes, sniffing, listening, sniffing yet more. Europe began to growl, ever so softly, impatient with his silence. "There's something amiss on the wind, milady. Something unsettling. Away down there." He gestured into the trees. The Fulgar sat back, rubbing her face as if she was vexed by a headache. "Well, you go and see what it might be." She sighed. "I'll finish the treacle myself, shall I? Now go on with you then." The leer hesitated. He gathered his cloak about himself and stalked off, passing quickly through a black gap between rough trunks. Rossamünd could not hear anything but the pound, pound, pound of his pulse in his ears, nor more particularly smell anything that he might call amiss or unsettling. He was relieved beyond expression simply to be released from the murderous intentions of that wicked man. Though he breathed heavily, he became still. In the quiet, the Fulgar watched the forest. "He'll be gone a goodly while, I'm sure. So we have some time to get you all back to how you should be." Her voice was tired. "Do you have any restoratives or vigorants? I will give you some of mine, child, but they are made particularly for my peculiar constitution. And I doubt whether that crusty old leer will let you have any of his." She wiggled her arching eyebrows at him as if they were together in some conspiracy. Wanting to keep her in this currently friendly mood, Rossamünd managed to meet a weak grimace. Good lord, I am stumbling over my words. And with numbness lessening and movement returning, nodded once. "And where might they be?" Rossamünd grimaced as he tried for the first time to speak. "Satchel." With great effort, he tried to sit up. Europe reached over to help him. He shrank from her touch and slid back down the slippery seat. She saw his discomfort and, taking her hands off him with a false sounding, "There you go," took up his satchel and sat back. A powerful exhaustion settled over Rossamünd as he finally succeeded in sitting up. And he watched as the Fulgar fossicked about in his belongings. After a moment, she pulled something from the satchel. She held out her hand. There were the sacks of baller salts, amazingly dry and potent again. After their dunking, the humor had made them into pointless slop. What remarkable things Krampolin's chemistry can do. Useful, Europe cocked her head, but not what we require. She went back to rummaging, at one point pulling out the mash that had been his traveling papers and folding money, still damp and starting to smell. There's a mystery, she said, placing the sodden lump on the seat beside her. A few moments more, she produced what she sought. Small, familiar milky bottles with deep blue symbols and Crampolin's mark of CRPN. Aha! I'd recognize these anywhere. She held one out. Evander water. Good for all. Somebody likes you, little man, to be prescribing this. Both vigorant and restorative in one happy draught. Glorious day. Open up and don't mind the taste. Rossamünd knew what they were and blessed the old dispenseress in his heart, as he had already many times, for his generosity. She broke the red wax seal and reached over to administer the restorative. If it had not come from his own belongings, had he not recognized his own bottles, he would never have let the Fulgar so much as wave the stuff in his direction. Even so, he was still uneasy. As his lips came to the bottle, the smell of its contents rushed up his nose. Strong and sharp, it took away the heaviness and brightened his thoughts. Contrary to the smell, however, it tasted remarkably bland. If Rossamünd were ever to eat chalk, he would have said that Evander water tasted like that. A liquid with the flavor of powder.
Oh, kind of like sake to me. Whenever I had sake one time. Admittedly, it was cold sake, but still. Tasted like liquid chalk.
Interesting. Let's see. He was dosed with the whole bottle, about 3 swallows, and quickly began to improve. Muscles loosened, vision cleared, the pain in his head lessened markedly. He arched his back and stretched his arm out and up with a groan, twisting his neck back and forth. Finding Europe watching him, he ducked his head self-consciously and offered a muttered thank you to the Lazar. The Fulgar waved a hand. Tish tosh. He saw the little container of whortleberries and with a cautious eye on the Fulgar, took one. She watched him impassively and did not intervene. He ate eagerly. Now he felt much better, able to move once more, though still a little stiffly. No pain, able to see, able to flee, but to where? This forest was surely just as dangerous, and Lear would find him anyway. Well now, Europe seemed fidgety. I absolutely must do the brewing. Stay, I'll be back presently. Tomorrow we'll be coming to a weigh house, so you can have that to look forward to. You'll be much happier there, I'm sure. Rossamünd did not doubt her. As the Fulgar climbed down from the landlet bearing her black occult box, a noise came, distant yet distinct, from the direction of Licurius's exploration. Looking toward the sound with a frown, the rope stepped to the ground. That can't bode good, she observed. The sound came again. A series of sounds, really. To Rossamünd, it was like someone thrashing about in the undergrowth. He opened his mouth to ask, but Europe silenced him with the palm of a hand. Though she held it there for only a moment, Rossamünd noticed 5 small lumps upon her bare palm. Raised and discolored like moles, he had no idea what they were. Is that where the electricity comes from? Curious. The Fulgar took something out of the black box and put it in her mouth, just as she had before the last fight. She grimaced in much the same way too as she chewed, putting the box back in the landlet and adjusting the lantern, making it brighter. All the while she stared in the direction of the noises. Was there going to be another fight? Rossamünd craned his neck, wide-eyed once more at an approaching invisible threat. They were in a clearing just off the side of a road that crested this hill. All about were closely growing pines with with only the narrowest space in between each trunk. The thrashing came closer through those small gaps. Europe stirred up the fire, put on another log. She was trying to make more light. Far from wanting to hide from any danger, unlike Rossamünd, she wanted to see what was to come, confident of mastering any event. Pacing between the landaulet and the flames, she buckled up the frock coat, never taking her eyes off the wall of trunks. There was a flash and a loud fizzing close by. Some way to the right where the Lear had departed. Bright in blue, the trees obscuring it, shown as black stark poles. Rossamünd almost fell over in fright and shrank down into the seat, peering over its edge. More thrashing about, the crashing of a heavy thing pushing through thin boughs, smaller whippings, closer, closer. Something appeared on the edge of the light. It was Licurius. The Lear's tricorn was gone, his cloak badly torn, ripped almost from his frame. His Thenacon half wrenched from his face, yet he still clutched a pistol. Shocked, Europe took a step toward him. Bloodied and torn, he staggered into the clearing and, with a shuddering wheeze, rasped, in the loudest hoarse whisper he possessed, "My lady, we are attacked!" The dark erupted with shrieks and yells, one of them Rossamünd's own as he gave a cry to his fear. The landaulet jerked violently. Oh, shit, dropped it. Come on, get over here. There we go. My little page holder had fallen out of my hand. Well, I say mine. Technically, Darkus did get it for me, but it's technically his since he bought it.
Nah, it's yours. You're using it, not me. I may borrow it from time to time if I decide to do a reading, but the reading thing is your shtick, so that's for you.
Right. The landaulet jerked violently, throwing Rossamünd from the seat to the floor as the horse started in fright at this assault and tried to bolt. Hobbled and hitched, it could not get far at all. After only a couple of yards, the carriage halted suddenly with a strangled whinny from the horse, tumbling the boy within at once more. He scrambled along the floor and peeked over the side. Shadows dashed and darted on the fringes of the camp. Things with big heads and little bodies were pouring out from between the trees with triumphant yammering, hard to see despite the fire and lamplight. They overwhelmed Licurius as he turned to defend himself. Down he went, firing his pistol as he fell, pressed under a multitude of gnashing, nipping boggles. Europe cried wordlessly, yet before she could intervene, she too was set upon by many small terrors. They tore at her viciously, trying to pull her down too, shrieking, "Murderer! Murderer!" in shrill unison. She swept each one as it came, throwing several off at a time with a powerful zack that declared the Fulgar was about her gruesome work. She stepped and pranced with venomous speed, spinning, striking, her eyes wide and wild, her hair standing on end, frock coat hems flying dramatically, as they were clearly meant to do, showing many layered white petticoats beneath. It was a great spectacle of flickering sparks to see the Fulgar fighting in the night. Every nasty gripping horror that got a hold was soon sent flying. Almost every strike she made gave a brisk crack and a brilliant flash like a little lightning. Several times one of the beastly little things was sent hurling to its end in a great arc of electricity, strobing in blinding green between it and the Fulgar. In each brief glare, the whole scene would be quickly lit like a glimpse of day. None could best her. Even if they did get a good hold, the needle-like teeth and cruel claws of these grinning fiends proved almost useless against her stout proofing. It was not over for the Lear either. There was a bright hissing flare from beneath the writhing pile of boggles that sent them reeling and filled the air with a putrid stench, surely some powerful repellent. Licurius stood among them, dark and wet with gore, smashing one with a deadly blow with the handle of his pistol. The Sthenicon was gone, torn off in the brutal fray. The Lear glared about with his terrible eyes and struck out again, causing something to yowl piteously. Amid all the confusion and alarm, Rossamünd was for a moment transfixed by the Lear's face. His horrible, indescribably broken face. Little wonder he wore that box. There was another fizzing, hissing flash as Licurius lit off another repellent, driving a handful of the knickers hollering in agony back into the woods. But the rest came at him, leaping up, clutching, gouging, tearing at exposed places, bearing the Lear down under their ferocity. Licurius disappeared once more beneath the whelming assault. He did not rise again. The rope fought on and on, heedless of anything but the deadly, desperate dance she played with her many foes. Some of the grinning horrors now lay still and smoldering. Many had ran off in dismay. Still, she faced a baker's dozen more gathering themselves after the Lear's fall. She saw him then, her factotum, or what was left of him. Rossamünd watched as the knickers wrenched and ripped at the Lear until they were convinced he was destroyed, declaring their success with blood-curdling cackles and whoops of glee. Now only a dark, deformed pile remained. And we have a sketch of something. I'm assuming it's these creatures attacking them. The nimble shrews, or grinlings as they're called. See, big ears for strong hearing. No nose means they cannot smell. Cannot smell, bar they do not. But they do not. I'm not sure. It's difficult to read. Producing. Not sure. Little spines. Very nasty, very quiet, very sneaky. And apparently there's a chinless variety. The sight of it brought Europe short. She stood now, panting, seething, almost growling. With wide, near-maniacal eyes, she stared across the fire at 13 little grinning boggles who waited and glared back, snickering, poking and prodding each other. These grinlings had large heads with big square ears, no noses and lipless mouths crammed with needle teeth. And remarkably, there were clothes, small copies of human fashion, shirts, coats, breeches, even little buckled shoes. For a moment it remained like this, the enemies eyeing one another. Rossamünd had expected an exchange of words, of taunts or threats, but there was just this dreadful, pregnant hesitation, punctuated by the distant wailing of wounded, fleeing grinlings. The campfire crackled, the small cauldron on it hissing quietly with boiling water. The universe waited. Europe shifted her stance. With cacophonous screeching, the 13 grinlings suddenly bounded over and around the fire. The Fulgar kicked at the first as it vaulted the flames, sending it hurtling back the way it came with great blinding lightning flickering from Europe's boot sole to the boggle. She immediately sprang back, making room, and smote the next two who reached for her. Right hand striking left, left hand striking right, slapping one in the face, zack, thumping the other square in its chest, zick. 3 down, 10 to go. Rapidly sidestepping to her left, avoiding grasping claws, the Fulgar poked the next gnashing nicker right in its eye, sending sparks from its ears and squealed from its throat that expired to a gurgle. 9. Now the remnant grinlings pounced as one, grappling with her together, on her back, about her legs, tugging on her arms. Rossamünd waited for them to fall to their spawking doom, but instead Europe appeared to contort violently, staggering by some dark internal force greater than those 9 grinlings could muster. Her back arched involuntarily. Her head thrown back, she screamed. The grinlings hesitated, but remained unharmed. With cackles and evil whoopings, they pressed this new advantage, biting, gouging, ripping. Rossamünd's thoughts raced. He had to do something. He looked about wildly for a weapon. Something. Anything. The Bothersalts. He snatched up the satchel and leapt from the carriage, madly digging within the bag for the small Hessian sack. He dashed to the fight, Bothersalts still undiscovered. In the dimming light, you could see Europe being pulled to the ground just as Licurius had been. Shortly, it would be over. There they are. He grabbed the sacks roughly, ripped them out, and hurled them in one complete move, all thoughtless, terrified instinct. The repellents flew remarkably true, bursting their powder over the murderous gang, just as one of the grinlings caught sight of the Foundling. There was a great chorus shriek as the Bothersalts did their work. Some of the grinlings left off their rending to paw instead at their now burning faces. Others were simply distracted by this attack from an unexpected quarter. Europe too was engulfed in the acrid assault, but through her pain or dazzled senses, she still had enough pith to give one final, might be suicidal burst of electricity. Several grinlings fell, expiring instantly. For the rest, this was too much. Wrathful sparks from one side, bitter chemistry on the other. They fled screaming, every last one, their howls diminishing as they retreated further and further, as fast as their little legs could carry them. They had done it. They had won. On the needle-matted ground, with many dead grinlings sprawled about, and a tendril of smoke rising from her back, Europe had collapsed, dreadfully still, dreadfully silent. Well, that's going to call it for this video. In this chapter. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like and a comment down below your opinion on this chapter so far, and on this story so far. I must admit, didn't think we would see a full-on fight. At least not this soon. I thought it might have been another chapter or two. That was quite intense. And it's apparent that the unfortunate Lear did not make it. Unfortunate that he could have helped, but he was quite the vindictive individual, so I'm not entirely sure what would have happened if he had survived. But either way, make sure to comment. Well, actually, I already said that. I'm getting my brain mixed around thinking on everything that is happening. It is interesting. And apparently, Fulgar have little lumps on their hands. Quite possibly where their electricity is released from the palms. And judging by the one incident where she kicked one away with lightning streaming from her foot, she might have the same organs within her feet as well. It is curious. I'm definitely intrigued to know what mysterious organs are placed within Lazar Fulgars, or Fulgar Lazars, I suppose would be proper. But I suppose that'll be for another day to find out. And your rope never did get that treacle, whatever that is. It's not treacle as I'm thinking of it, which is the dessert item. But I'm assuming it is that black tar-like substance that she had drank before. And either way, we may get an explanation on that in the future as well. But in the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you can be alerted whenever a new video goes live. In the meantime, I will see you all in the next chapter. And I am Gresham's it all, and I do hope you have a pleasant day.